Good day to everyone, wherever you are. My name is Jim Czuprynski. My topic today is I was just talking with Neil, my colleague and fellow ACE director. What does this title actually mean? And I promised to explain it, but for now, just hi. I'm going to go ahead and mute my video. You don't need to see my face. And let's get started. I want to talk to you about really more than anything else, Apex and the marvelous things that I've been able to experiment with and play with and actually do with it in real life situations. A bit more about myself. I'm finishing my fourth decade, if you will, in information technology. I go so far back that I remember when it was still called data processing. That's how old I am. And yes, I'm old. I saw the first episode of Star Trek when it was first broadcast live on television. All right, I'll leave it there. I've been an Oracle DBA primarily since 2001 and have achieved OCPs and other designations. I've been awarded the status of ACE Director and have been an active participant since 2014 in the ACE program. We had an ACE briefing yesterday about things coming down the pike for 21C and other things coming for Apex. And I wish I could tell you about them, but they are awesome. Things are going to get even better in 2021. But we'll have to wait for 2021. I'm also, by the way, quite involved with OD-TUG. I know many of my colleagues in Europe and across the world are involved with OD-TUG. We have an event called Kaleidoscope or K-Scope that's scheduled for June of 2021. It's going to be in Nashville, Tennessee. I've helped the database community portal kind of revitalize itself with something called tech acceleration. And several of my colleagues in Europe and across the US, of course, have contributed articles, not presentations, articles, okay? If you're interested in trying your hand at writing, we have an excellent editing staff, me and a few others, and feel free to contact me at any one of these links here. That's my email address. Please do reach out to me. And I'd love to hear more from you, especially on any Oracle topic. But enough about me and about our organizations here. What does the title of this presentation mean? Well, I'm from Chicago, Illinois, and Chicago has a long history in the world of politics, if not for many other things. And the title, Politics Ain't Beanbag, is an interesting discussion because I'm really going to be talking about how we use Apex in real life use cases, in this case, an election campaign. The presentation here, I've got a picture here up on the left-hand side. This is what Beanbag is. Sometimes it's also been called cornhole. And the idea is you have this little platform, it's angled, and there's a hole cut in it, and you take a bag that's filled with beans or corn kernels, and you throw it across to your other, the goal. There's no defending or anything like this. You just try to get it in the hole. That's why it's called beanbag, cornhole. That's why it's really called that. But I just want to mention that my city has a flag with 4 stars on it. And they're very significant because they actually represent historical events. A little more about that in a minute. But the politics ain't beanbag phrase comes from this guy named Finley Peter Dunn, who was a writer for the Chicago Tribune, very well-known newspaper here in the Midwest. And he had a character, an Irish character, because there were many Irish people as well as Polish and Italian and you name it in Chicago. He made up this character called Mr. Dooley. Mr. Dooley had an Irish accent. You could see when he was writing it, and he would say, politics ain't beanbag. What he meant is, it's not a game. And, another person who had that favorite phrase was our first African-American mayor, Harold Washington. Harold was a very interesting guy. It was very interesting times in the early 1980s when he finally became mayor, our first African-American mayor. And what's interesting about that is where he fits into history, because the stars on our flag actually represent some interesting things. The founding of Fort Dearborn, the first star. The second star, the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. The third star, the Columbian Exposition in 1893, and finally, the Chicago World's Fair in 1933, called the Century of Progress. The irony is that that very first star, the founding of Fort Dearborn, really wasn't what it represented, because this man, also African, Jean-Baptiste Pointe-du-Sable, was actually the founder of Chicago. It only took 180 years for us, 150 years, I should say, to get our first African-American mayor. And the reason is politics ain't beanbag. Chicago is one of the heaviest segregated cities in the north of our country. And politics is in our mother's milk. It's very interesting. So a little introduction into where the title comes from, but what I want to talk to you about next is really Apex. I've been an applications developer before in my career. I spent the first 20 years actually as a developer. I recently got into application development with Apex, and I found out that it's an excellent tool. And the future of our industry really revolves around the fact that there's an autonomous database somewhere in your future. In fact, I'm going to demonstrate some stuff today that's on an ATP instance, okay? And I'm running Apex directly inside that instance. Apex makes it super simple to get data from anywhere and to actually convert stuff over, even if it's just an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Sheet, directly into Apex, right? You may or may not know that, but it's quite easy to do. The other thing I'm going to demonstrate a little bit later today are using APIs, right? Now, remember, Oracle has a REST API to enable all of the tables that you have inside a traditional RDBMS Oracle instance, so that you can access them with gets, posts, puts, deletes. Yeah, you can do all that through HTTP. And that means you have a low code environment. And finally, the whole reason for all of this is we're getting to data-driven or digitally driven organizations. Everything today, and elections, by the way, I have some excellent examples, are no different. We are moving away from, I wonder if the transaction completed, to, I wonder what the data that we've collected from our transactions about our customers or our voters can tell me about what I should do next. And I have some excellent stories I'll share with you that are just amazing about the data that we've been able to collect, not just about voters, but people actually working on campaigns. The major thing that's happening in our industry is specialization is dying, right? I don't know what the next role is going to be called after Oracle DBA. All I know is that DBA and maybe even DevOps DBA and application developer are munging together. And what I found, I've been reading this book called Range by David Epstein. He mentioned that in his book, Nobel laureates are 22 times more likely to partake in something totally at right angles to whatever they're doing, right? So it's not unusual for me to suddenly become an Apex developer because I'm a DBA, because I have a second hobby, if you will. And speaking, by the way, of the generalist, right? You may know this gentleman, you may have heard of him. He was the general that was in command of the 101st Airborne at Bastogne in Belgium. I'm sorry. Yeah, right. I got it right. When the Germans had surrounded the American troops at Bastogne, my father-in-law was actually there. He had some interesting stories. It was pretty horrific, but the German army told the Americans, we got you surrounded, surrender. And this guy said one word, nuts. He probably had another word in mind, knowing Americans in that war, but he didn't swear. The key thing is McAuliffe said to his men, we now have the enemy exactly where we want them. We can attack in any direction. And that's where we are today, folks. That's where we are today. If data is the new oil, and the people drawing it out and making it into gasoline and diesel fuel and whatever else are data scientists, DBAs, and really actually application developers or DevOps DBAs, if you will, are the new roustabouts, the people out in the field actually sinking those pipes down deep into the ground. And if you want to get a handle on where machine learning and everything else is really going and prediction, grab a handle on this book by Nate Silver called The Signal and the Noise. Nate Silver, by the way, runs a website here in the United States called 538. 538 is in the business of predicting all kinds of things, but especially elections. And right now, they're predicting whether the president, which candidate's going to win for the presidency. And it's quite interesting how they're doing that. Here's our future, the Converged database. Note at the center, an ADW or ATP, or even something relatively new, you can get to this today, an autonomous JSON database. Let's be honest, we're doing a lot more work in JSON these days because it's kind of like the new XML, right? It's, if you will, almost like a markup language, but not really. It's really for data storage. With an AJD instance, you can basically use an autonomous database instance as a document store, more specifically as a document store. But what I focus on here, and what I'm going to really focus on today, is the right-hand side of this slide, right? Analyzing our data, making digitally driven decisions, visualizing the results of that so that people can immediately close their eyes after viewing something and go, ah, I see what we should be doing. And the consumers of that are going to be our business leaders, data scientists, analysts, and even us, right? And the reason I chose an election campaign was everybody understands elections, right? First of all, I have a minor in political science. I find governing folks to be one of the most difficult things in the world. I've led small teams. I've had to motivate people. Governing people and getting them to think in unison is kind of like herding cats. And let me tell you, the election campaign that I've been working on for now actually almost 3 years, because the congressional candidate, the US congressional candidate for our House of Representatives, was a challenger in 2018. And we had 4 months to build some sort of campaign organization. Our candidate happens to be a Democrat. And there's an old story about Democrats in the United States that if they ever organized a firing squad, they would line up in a circle. We have a rather large tent. We have all kinds of fringe groups. The Republicans in our country, not that way. They're much more organized and much more single focused, right? Another joke from one of our well-known politician commentators, a guy named Will Rogers, was, the Democrats, I'm not a member of an organized political party. I'm a Democrat, right? It's kind of like herding cats to get them to herd cats. It's very difficult to keep people motivated because of the diversity inside the group. But we still needed to build these things. We needed to have some way to manage our campaign organization. We needed to display the activities of our canvassers. Now, this is back in 2018 even, right? We needed to know, are people knocking on doors? Are they making phone calls? How successful are they at reaching out on behalf of our candidate? Because our candidate, no one that was a Democrat had won this particular seat in 35 years. So we were way behind the 8 ball in trying to get this to work. We also needed to know the hierarchy of our organization staff. And remember, it's pretty disorganized. People want to know, who do I report to and who's reporting to me? And finally, we needed to concentrate on where we were getting coverage, because our particular district is ginormous. It's huge. It covers about 250,000 people, 278,000 people to be precise, in a very relatively wealthy district in northern Illinois, very close to Chicago, where I live, where I was born. So one of the first things I did is I built a little application that would allow us to actually look at a particular voter and see how they felt about our candidate over time. The data I'm sharing with you here, and as well as all other data I'll share with you, is not real, okay? It's simulated, or it's been obfuscated because I don't want to reveal any sensitive data. But you can see here what I built was, for someone named Marcus Czuprynski, a list of every single contact that we made to him, either by an outreach, by an email, by knocking on a door, or some event, right? I built this. This is essentially a parent-child relationship between the voters table and the Canvas history table in my application. I built this in a weekend. After reading the documentation, it took me about 4 hours to really build this thing out. 2 hours to read the docs and 2 hours to build the actual app. But when it came down to it, to build these two screens, it was about 5 mouse clicks once I understood what I was doing. If I had been a Power Builder developer, I would have been struggling with this for 2 weeks. The beautiful thing about Apex is the models that are built within here are so simple to use that you can build a complex application relatively quickly. And I'm going to share with you right now, I'm going to shift over to my actual application here, bring it up, because I want to share with you a few of the techniques that are actually built into this. So I'm going to log into my little application here. Ashburn's been a little bit unresponsive today, so hopefully I'll be able to bring this up in a minute or two. But I built the actual application, and I'll go back to my slides while that's loading here, because I have some cool things to share with you. I remember I said, hey, I need to know who's reporting to who. So the way we had it divided was essentially volunteers at the very bottom, other organizers just above them, and then about 5 to 10 people who Mr. Barnes here is a representative, was at the top level, right? Basically committees within inside the individual campaign. So I was able to lay this thing out and build a little pie chart. I don't like pie charts per se, but who had, for the committee lead, who was his campaign organizers and how well they've done in terms of reviving support for a particular candidate, right? And a list of those campaign organizers, and even better, drilling down into individual campaign organizers, volunteers. And note that, again, this is data from 2018, that as we rounded the corner in October of 2018, that, yeah, we're just pounding the pavement here and we are getting out there and canvassing voters very heavily. That's good news, right? Let me see if my app's come back up yet. No, it seems to not be participating today. I may not be able to share much with you. Let me log out and log back in just briefly while we're talking here. Sometimes it happens, right? Sometimes we need to come back into our apps and make sure everything's working. Let me just log back in real briefly here. Make sure that I've got all my passwords secured. There we go. Let me see if I can get back in. And while that's loading, I'll come right back to our presentation. I apologize for the delay. But I was able to build these screens and drill down into information about the committee leads, the campaign canvassing organizers, and the volunteers reporting to them, including the final lowest level of detail, in about a few hours. That's the power of Apex as I saw it. What about actually getting out to people in the field? Now, again, this is 2018. This is pre-COVID. So we could go around and actually knock on doors. My wife actually did some knocking on doors. And I said, well, which app did you use? She goes, we don't have an app. It was me and a clipboard and a pen. And I'm like, oh, no, hon, no, that's not going to work. Let me build an app. Maybe somebody at that campaign will be interested in using it. I built this app in just a few minutes. I should say a few hours. It took a few minutes to actually test it out and make sure it worked very well. And I built this to a point where you would select whoever you were, Gary Adams, Ernest Alexander, and then I would build a random list with a little anonymizing or randomizer PL/SQL procedure actually to pull up a random list of 5 voters that you would talk to, maybe via phone or perhaps via email or even maybe knocking on a door, right? And then have a way for you to record whether they were positive or negative towards the candidate, whether they were interested in volunteering, maybe in contributing money. Campaigns in the United States run on dollars. Every day, I get a request for, can you give $3, $5, $25, $100 to a campaign? And I'm involved in supporting about 5 other Senate campaigns as well. The emails are constantly coming out, and it's not just to ask me if I'm having a nice day, right? So that's just the way campaigns run in the United States these days. But I wanted to build something that would be mobile. Could I run this on a desktop? Sure. Could I use it on a mobile phone? Yes. That's the thing I love about Apex, right? That you can build an app that will run on a desktop, on an iPad, on a tablet, or on an iOS-based or Android-based phone, because it's JavaScript. Underneath the covers, that's all you really need to worry about. Let me just check and see if my app ever came up. And oh boy. All right. Well, I won't be demoing anything today for you, unfortunately. We're having some issues with Ashburn today. Oh, well, better not to know. Here we go. With 2018 to 2020, things changed. In 2020, we had COVID. And that meant we couldn't go and talk to voters directly, knock on doors. And we're in the last few weeks of our election campaign for Congress. That's changed the game quite a bit for us. But we still needed to do all of these different things, including trying to figure out whether or not voters would be flippable. And by the way, it doesn't really matter which political party you belong to when we talk about this, because what we're really trying to see is, hey, it seems to me that you voted as a Democrat. I shouldn't say voted, but registered in one of our primaries in Illinois, declared yourself as a Democrat. And you did that for 3 cycles running. And now you declared yourself as a Republican. Huh, that's interesting. A Republican candidate would consider that voter to be flippable. In other words, someone that is showing a proclivity now to a different political party. I want to make it plain. We don't know how people vote. We just know which party they declared under. And it's perfectly possible that someone could declare as a Republican and vote for the weakest candidate. Remember, politics ain't beanbag, and vote for the weakest Republican candidate so that the Democrats would have a better chance of winning. And this happens on both sides of the party. So I needed to build an analysis of that, right? This time we had more time. I started in November of 2019 to do some of this. We also wanted to make sure that we were going to be able to deploy our volunteers, because the political situation here in the United States, I don't know how you could not know this, has not exactly gotten any better since 2016. It's become much more divisive. And people, the good news about that is people are much more interested in volunteering. So we know we were going to have tens of thousands of volunteers we probably have to handle. And finally, making sure that our voters are being reached. This time around, I had some ears and people were willing to listen. Did they take my advice? No. Did I still build a model? Yeah. And I realized the best place to do it was an autonomous, always free, the always free layer, right? Why? Centralized data management, a simple data model. I've got 6, 7, 8 tables. That's it. The data volume is under a few dozen million rows, certainly under 10 million rows. I figured I would need machine learning and analytics and GIS features, geolocation features, right? Because I need to know where my voters are. I need to know where I need to get merch to that. That's a new phrase that we've been using a lot in elections these days. I'll explain that in a second. And finally, security. 2 angles on that. I want to preserve the sacredness of my voter information. It is public information, but I want to preserve everyone's privacy. And secondly, campaigns are actively looking to steal information from each other. There's no reason that they wouldn't if they could. And as the saying goes, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. So I wanted to build something that was super secure. The beautiful thing about Apex and Autonomous Database, of course, is that in Autonomous Database, you don't have a choice. Everything's encrypted. You simply don't have a choice. You can't turn that off. And I love that. AWS RDS, some of the other things, MongoDB, not necessarily, right? And so some of the things I needed to do involved using external sources. And I'm going to share that with you right now. Let me see if Ashburn ever came back. Ashburn's very, very tired today, folks. Story of my life. That's okay. I have plans. I have ways to share this with you. So one of the things that's big in the United States in many of the campaigns this year is merchandise, or merch for short. So we built in our campaign's website the ability for people to order things like a sign to put on their lawn, Do you want a big sign or a little sign? Or would you like a coffee cup with our candidate's name on it, right? This is the new trend, right? I don't know if you had heard, but during our last presidential debate, one candidate said to the other candidate, "Will you just shut up?" If you've been following the news, you know who said it, right? Within an hour, the Democratic National Committee had a t-shirt of that phrase overlaid on top of the current president's face. And it was up for sale for $35. I'm just saying, merch is a big deal these days. So instead of letting me build an app, my campaign folks came to us and said, well, we've got these Excel spreadsheets. Why Excel? First of all, I just don't like using Excel for anything except gathering data and putting it into databases. There's just too much imprecision inside Excel. Not a bad tool until you have to use it. They brought to me an Excel spreadsheet. And I said, well, that's great. I can upload the data up into my database if necessary. Except they said, oh, by the way, you know how we split our 280,000 people into 8 different regions? Because that's what we had to do to manage the territories, the thousands of volunteers. He said, hey, the thing I'm going to share with you, it's going to have a different region 1, region 4, region 8, whatever it is, on a different tab inside your worksheet. I'm like, Excel's bad enough. You're using tabs. Okay, fine. I can make that work. The demonstration thing here that I'm sharing with you, by the way, this came directly from the data loading and the data loading sample application. There we go. I spit it out. That's part of Apex 19.2. Did you know that? There are a bunch of excellent sample applications that you can basically import pieces of or in their entirety into your existing Apex applications. They've been very well built. They've been tested innumerable times. And I use this technique to basically quickly draw these data, again, not real people, not even real addresses, into my Apex application. Well, why did I do that? Well, number one, we wanted to be able to track the types of merchandise and types of requests for signs or whatever it might be so that we had enough inventory. But more importantly, so that we could determine where people are. Because this time around, people couldn't come to a campaign office to pick up merchandise because of COVID-19. We were going to have to find a way to deliver it to them. And that meant we had to deploy an army of volunteers, around 200 people, to deliver everything from coffee cup requests to campaign signs. So I was tasked with the job of figuring out where everybody was. And why? Because we wanted to build routes for everyone inside our campaign so that they could efficiently deliver all of our merchandise and our signs. So that means I needed to know the latitude and longitude of every registered voter that requested that. And again, I know this is election stuff, but is it any different for your customers, for your body politic, whatever it might be? No, you need to know this. Here's the trick. Can you use Google Maps to do that? Sure, you can use it to get a geocode, a latitude and longitude, and you almost immediately start costing money. Did you know that? That's not free inside Google Maps, okay? So I found a couple of examples of ways to do this. One is MapQuest. MapQuest will let you essentially request innumerable single requests for an address, just about anywhere in the world, by the way. Haven't tried Antarctica, but I know it works in Europe, Asia, Africa, pretty much anywhere that we can geocode an address, right? So I built a simple little proof of concept, and it involves something called the web source module in Apex, right? And I had heard about these. I'm like, wow, this would be a nice little application. And all I do is I call an API. I've got an API key for the MapQuest development console. I pass in an address. And in this case, here's my address right here. This is my address. This is where I live, Bartlett, Illinois. And an API key, right? Almost all APIs require some sort of key, even Google Maps does. And guess what I get back? Well, I have to process the data that comes back. And I did this with a little PL SQL module that essentially said, hey, here's the parameters I'm going to pass in. Here's what I'm going to get back out. I'm going to get a latitude and a longitude and a few other interesting pieces. If you haven't done geolocation, it's a fascinating topic, almost as fascinating as politics. And I'm showing you the actual code. All that I actually did was pass in an address with a comma delimited address, basically street number, street name, city, state, and postal code, zip code, as we call it here in the US. And what did I get back? Basically that information. And then I passed that back to a response window. And note that I changed the variable here for a second test a little bit. This address up here, 359 Pebble Beach Lane, doesn't exist. And that's okay, because what you can get from a lot of these geolocation tools is actually a code that tells you how accurate the geolocation information is. And you see this little quality code here, L1AAA? It tells me that it's not a perfect match. If it was perfect, it would be a P, as in Paul, 1AAA. It still tells me that there's probably something named 359 Pebble Beach Lane. The street exists, the city and state and postal code exists. And if it did exist, it would be on the right-hand side of the street. I actually live on the north-hand side of the street, north side of the street, if we're facing north. And that's cool that you can get this kind of information. But imagine doing this 25,000 times. Is that going to take a lot of time? Yeah. So here's another thing you could do. There are other geocoding tools that will return batches of addresses. And so in my case, I found another one called GeoCode.io, GeoCodio, GeoCod.io, that would return up to 2,500 separate requests. Here's the wrinkle. Could I hit it with a web source module? Sure. Here's the wrinkle. I have to do it not with a GET request, but with a POST request. And it took a CLOB. And guess what was inside the CLOB? JSON. So I used Apex JSON. I'm not going to show you all the code here. I have a link to the article that actually explains how I did this. To create, submit, and then receive, yeah, guess what? Guess what comes back? JSON. And so I would need to parse that into specific information. And so here, I essentially made the same call, same type of call to the GeoCode.io API. I have an API key, and what am I sending them? Notice the method is post. What am I sending it? A CLOB. What did I get back? A JSON document. Again, I'm not sharing all of the code here with you. The link here, by the way, if you do go to this link, and we will be sending out the slides later with the proper user group tag. I realize it says Dallas Oracle Users Group. I just realized that. I'm sorry. No insult. But you can actually see all the code that I wrote to return a CLOB from this post request and how I decoded that into all of the addresses, right, that I needed to obtain latitude and longitude for. Why? Because I needed to find out where everybody was. That's one of the things I love about Apex. Here's another thing I love about Apex. If you're doing OML, Oracle Machine Learning, or if you're doing Oracle Analytic Cloud, and you know how Oracle does everything, right? For any machine learning techniques, any type of algorithms, you're calling DBMS data mining. That's what you're calling, a PL SQL procedure. That procedure creates objects, views, tables, based on what you tell it to create. That means I can use Apex to access those same objects. And so if I don't have the money, for example, to license Oracle Analytic Cloud, remember OAC is a separately priced item, or OML is not sophisticated enough in terms of its graphics, and I want to embed things inside my application, I can do it with Apex. And here's an example of some of the different algorithms that you can actually use. That cheat sheet, by the way, has the list of about 24 different machine learning algorithms, some supervised, some unsupervised. And I, in fact, used an unsupervised algorithm for my example of building out a decision tree algorithm, I should say, for finding my flippable voters. When I had that data, what I was able to do inside Apex, by the way, this is not the actual results of who's flippable. It's actually looking at the metadata about the model itself. Whenever you run a decision tree, right, you basically take your test data, I should say training data, you train your model with about 60 to plus percent, at least 60% of the test cases, and then you let it learn in an unsupervised mode and then apply test cases to see how well your model has performed. And what this is showing is something called cumulative lift. It's a measure of how well, in a raw sense, my model has performed. Have I been able to find a significant number of flippable voters? And here's the other part of it. How accurate is this? Ideally, what I really need to do is embed one more graph in here, one more chart that says, here are the number of false positives and false negatives. And if you don't think those are important, COVID. Right now, we have a situation in the United States, for example, where many residents of nursing homes have been using the wrong test that has a 10 to 20% false negative rate. And so several nursing homes where a lot of our COVID deaths have been using a test that's essentially not accurate enough and has actually caused problems, not just in nursing homes, but actually in our White House, in our executive branch, because people were using a test that wasn't as reliable. And applying it here, I need to know, wow, I'm seeing lift, I'm seeing that my model works, but how accurate is this really there? My point is, and I do have one, that Apex makes it easy to see not just the results of the analytics, but also the accuracy of the analytics. And just one other little example. I have information about, remember, how people have declared themselves as whether Democrat or independent or whatever. What I was able to do in about 20 minutes, and I'm not kidding, I was able to build a very simple set of bubble plots showing male versus female versus overall voters across age range. And these last two graphs here that kind of look like cornucopia, right, are actually graphing the number of voters that have a tendency to vote Democratic in our district. But I'm also graphing them within, check that out, their declared ethnicity. Yes, we're a very white district here, about 80% white, but we have an amazing diversity of other ethnic groups, including African-American or Black Americans, Asians. We have a huge population in several sectors of Pakistani and Indian folks as well. In fact, the district over, the gentleman is actually a first generation American who is our representative, right? So we have this amazing diversity inside our campaign. And we're reaching out to all kinds of folks. We have innumerable Hispanic voters in a town just to the west of me. How do we reach out to people, right? Where is our sweet spot, right? We want to focus on the appropriate age range. By the way, female voters in the United States, especially in the suburbs, are going to be an immensely important group of voters in this particular election, especially for the presidency. So again, knowing your constituency, knowing your customer base, knowing your employee base, it's no different whether we're talking about an election or we're talking about the people you work with. And finally, some really cool stuff. You may not have heard about this. There is a Google Maps plugin that Jeffrey Kemp, he was an Oracle ace. He just recently, within the last month, I think, Jeffrey joined Oracle. He built this excellent Google Maps API plugin for Apex. So again, this does require for you to have a developer's API key for Google. But one of the cool things about his API is that with a simple query, remember I told you we needed to figure out where our merchandise requests are? I needed to differentiate between large campaign signs and small campaign signs because we got to find somebody with a car or truck big enough for the big campaign signs versus merchandise, right? Because merchandise can go in a little plastic bag and you can hang it on somebody's door versus I have to deliver a sign to someone's porch and make sure they get that campaign sign. And here's the results from that. Check this out. Oh, by the way, I can also say, hey, and the initial center of the Google map is going to be focused on my area. And this is some real-time data that I actually gathered and put into a Google Maps plugin. By the way, the link here to Jeffrey's Google Maps plugin is valid, but there's now a later release. I think Jeffrey released it just before he joined Oracle. And there are some minor fixes, but actually some new features that you can do. And you can even, with this plugin, you can even drag and drop a JSON, scratch that, a GeoJSON document, a JSON document that contains geocoding information directly into your Google Maps API. What if you are concerned about people overusing the Google Maps API? You have another option. Or maybe you just don't like Google, and that's okay too. You may not have known about this. There is an Apex Geolocation Showcase sample application that's already available, I know, for Apex 19.2, and I believe it's going to be available forward as well for 20.1 and whatever comes after 20.1 for Apex. It's a very similar format, and you can use it to do geolocation as well. Right now, I believe it's single address geolocation, but you don't need a Google developer API key to do it. And I hear rumors that at some point in the future, maybe there will be a batch geolocation facility. All right. By the way, Karsten Sarsky at Oracle is one of the key people who really knows this interface quite well. Feel free to reach out to Karsten if you want to. But I have the full capacity. By the way, right now, you can demonstrate geocoding inside this application, right? So again, if you're already working in Apex, I did this presentation a couple of weeks back, and I got a contact from someone in Canada who said, hey, we don't want to use Google Maps for exactly the reasons I'm talking about, right? The additional costs, the hassle of the API key. Can we do something like this in Oracle? And I'm like, let me tell you about the geolocation showcase. So again, you can import aspects of this application or the entire application into your existing Apex environment and experiment with this. This is where I'm going to be spending a lot of my time in the next 6 to 12 months because I really want to nail this thing down. Finding out where people are is really important, right? Because you need to figure out things like, well, yeah, I know where these people are. Remember back here, I'm just going to go back up to my distribution here for a minute. Well, great. I've got all these requests for some sort of merchandise. How the heck am I going to deliver it? I can't have that come to me. I have to go to them because of COVID-19, right? Illinois has done very well with COVID. Other states around us, just north of us, Wisconsin, has not done well. It's one of the 3 hot zones still in the United States because people haven't followed all of the recommended CDC guidelines, essentially, right? So some states have done well, we've done well, some states haven't done as well. So again, I think that for the foreseeable future, we're going to have to be thinking about where are people and how do I get things to them? So back to this for just a second, one of the other really cool things that is available inside Apex Geolocation Showcase is directions and routing, okay? So take a look at it. It's worth taking a look at. And I am essentially done, my friends. I'm going to go take a look at our questions. Let me go see what we got here in terms of anything. Let's take a look in the Q&A. Here's a bunch of great documents, by the way. I also mentioned the last 2 articles up here on Apex for machine learning, mapping, and geolocation. I did a 4-part series on using Apex in concert with machine learning, and actually more about machine learning at the beginning, and then more about using Apex in concert with that and mapping for the Texeleration portal that I mentioned for ODTUG. And the last two articles in that series delve into exactly what I did there for parsing data, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet, whether it's CSV, whatever. There's two really great blog postings here that really helped me out, as well as the documentation, of course. I did some 2-minute tech tips on geolocation, spatial, and graph features. By the way, one thing I didn't mention, spatial and graph used to be a non-free feature of Oracle. As of January this year, actually December of last year, there was no such limitations. Spatial and graph is now essentially included in the price of Oracle database. It makes sense to go check it out. Jeffrey Kemp's Google Maps API, I should say Apex plugins, some really great information here. And finally, that geolocation showcase, right? Again, I got nothing against Google Maps. I just don't like getting charged for things and not knowing about it. Go check out the geolocation showcase, experiment with it. There's some really neat stuff out there. And with that, Mirela, I guess I'll turn this back to you to see if we have any other questions or anything else like that. Anything in the chat?
Seems no, nothing.
Oh, excellent. 100% comprehension. No one has any questions at all. I've done my job.
And very well.
Thanks,
Let me, okay,
oh,
so
somebody just
said something. Okay.
Okay, I see one question in the Q&A, and yes, someone wants to get a copy of A DBA's Journey to Apex for VEVO 1.0. Please, Roman, if you would not mind, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Let me just post my email here if you didn't see it. Please email me directly, and I will do what I need to get you that information, okay? I think, yeah, that was originally hosted by the folks at IOUG, that folks that run Collaborate, but now with their merging here in the United States with Quest, I think some of that stuff may not be available. I would certainly be happy to get you that.